G'day and welcome to my first video in a new series called Organic Sound Design. I have more topics planned for the future where I'll demonstrate techniques in producing sounds that are inspired by our natural world. But today, in this tutorial, I'll use Serum and some of bitwig's features to show you how to create the sound of a large bird in flight. Here in this group channel, I have 2 examples of the outcome that we'll get by the end of this tutorial. I'm going to close this group. And here we have a new Serum instance. First of all, I need a MIDI note to trigger Serum. I've drawn one in that is 4 beats long. Now I'll click and open Oscillator A's wavetable editor here. Then we choose the noise drawing tool down here on the left and draw as much noise as possible on the waveform. Then we drop it by 4 octaves. Select 8 voices of unison. And set the random phase knob to 0. Oscillator B will be used for a more subtle, noisy texture layer. And for that, I'll choose the Monster 6 wavetable from the spectral category. This random phase parameter will also be set to 0, and the wavetable position will be set to the maximum. I'll then select the warp mode called FM from A and set that to a value of 65%. For now though, I'll be turning the level of the oscillator B all the way down, but later it will be modulated. We'll now make use of Serum's noise oscillator by turning it on here and choosing the Inharmonics 9 option. I'll pitch it down to 10% here, and this time the random phase will be set to 100%. I'll turn it right down because we'll only be using it as a modulation source for Oscillator A's pitch. In which case, I also need to select the FM from noise warp mode here as well. Now when I crank that up, we have a nice thick noise texture that we can have lots of control over. Okay, now let's shape the amplitude envelope in such a way that it starts to fade in and out, much like the sound of a bird flying past would. We want about 1.5 seconds of attack. 1.5 seconds with a slight logarithmic curve. And we want 0 hold time, 0 decay time, maximum sustain, and about 2.5 seconds of release time. And moving on, we'll start using LFO1. This is where things get fun. I'm going to edit the shape of LFO1 to make a crazy waveform, which will be our modulation source. This will help us begin to simulate the kind of randomness that a large bird's wings would sound like flapping through the air. What we need to do is edit the shape of the LFO to make some kind of crazy waveform, which will be our modulation source. Just in case you're not aware already, you can hold Shift on the keyboard while clicking and you can create these right angles, and we can curve these points as well. This comes in really handy when you want to customize the wave shape. Actually, I've created one and saved it from an earlier session, so I'm just going to go here and load that. Yours doesn't have to be exactly the same as mine. Mine was pretty random. I'm going to use LFO1 to modulate a few parameters. Starting with Oscillator A's level, I'll set the modulation depth to 35 and then adjust the parameter itself down to 5%. Next, I'll drag and drop it to Oscillator B's level, and that will have a modulation depth of 50. Now it's beginning to sound somewhat like a bird's wings flapping, but we have quite a bit more work to do before it starts to sound realistic. Let's go ahead now by adjusting a few parameters on the LFO. I want the rate to be in Hertz mode, so I'll turn off the BPM sync, and then I can set the rate to 3.2 Hertz. If you can imagine what a bird's wings sound like in real life, when they're further away, the sound is less defined than when up close. I also want the bird to appear like it's approaching from the right-hand side, passes me, and then continues on to the left-hand side. The first step towards this goal of distance is to smooth out the LFO shape. When the bird is far, the LFO will be smoothed out a bit. And when the bird is directly above my head, the LFO will be almost not smoothed out at all. When you turn the smooth parameter up, it basically reduces the jaggedness of the LFO shape and makes the changes more rounded and gradual. So basically at the start of the MIDI note, I want the smooth parameter to be somewhere around maximum. And then in the middle, I want it to come down to halfway-ish. Actually, no, probably more like 25%. And then I want it to go back to almost maximum, somewhere around maximum towards the very end, which is around 4 seconds. I should be able to use another one of Serum's LFOs and assign that to the LFO1 smooth parameter, but unfortunately you can't do that at the moment. Serum doesn't allow it, but luckily I can still achieve this using bitwig's LFOs. Whichever parameter in Serum that I last clicked appears now at the top of the device here. See, LFO1 smooth. That means I can add a bitwig LFO here and then assign that to the smooth parameter. If I click on the LFO here, it opens up all of the LFO's parameters. So I'll go ahead and assign that to the Serum LFO here. I'm going to slow that rate down a bit. .32 Hertz seems about right for now. Now I need to set the bitwig LFO to unipolar mode and enable note retrigger. And let's see how that sounds. But as you can see, something with the bitwig LFO isn't quite right yet. When the bitwig LFO is triggered with each MIDI note, the smooth parameter begins at about 75%. So we want it to start higher than that and then reduce over time until about the 2-second mark where the bird will be crossing in front of us. So I need to shift the phase of the LFO by about 25%. Now you'll see that when the MIDI note triggers the start of the LFO, the position of the smooth parameter is closer to 100% and then starts fading backwards, which is what we want. We want it to return to about 25% when the bird is at its shortest distance from us. And then as the bird flies off into the distance again towards the left, the LFO needs to come back so that the smooth parameter is closer to the maximum. To enhance this effect even more, I'm going to change the slope of the bitwig LFO from a normal linear setting to a logarithmic setting. And I can do this by going up here to the info panel and clicking just here next to where it says LFO smooth, and I can choose the response. I can change that from linear to logarithmic, exponential. Logarithmic's the one I want to use. So now you'll notice that the smooth parameter is being modulated in a way that is faster towards the lower setting. The transition from right to left will speed up at that point in the center. I can also tweak this a little bit more by adjusting the curve of the LFO here too. About 30% should be enough. Moving on to the filter section, I'm going to choose the filter type called All Passes. Without trying to explain how an all-pass filter is unique, in this case it's mainly serving as another volume control, which gives me more control over the dynamics of the combination of the oscillators. I'll turn the damp parameter all the way up, set the resonance to maximum, and the cutoff to 190 Hz. Then I'll assign LFO1 to the cutoff frequency with a depth of 14, and I'll assign it to the resonance with a negative depth of 100. I'll only have oscillator A routed through the filter, which will make oscillator A more dynamic, and in doing so allow oscillator B to stand out a bit more. Remember that oscillator A has 8 voices of unison, which gives it a lot of stereo width, whereas oscillator B is mono. Because oscillator A is running through the all-pass filter, this allows the mono aspect of the sound to be more prominent than the stereo. This is going to allow the wings to sound more directional and focused, which will be helpful later when we add panning from right to left. As you might hear now already, the stereo oscillator is now more quiet and appears more in the background. This gives a sense that the bird is flying through an environment where the sound of its wings are bouncing off the trees. Also, if you're wondering about those quiet whistling frequencies coming from oscillator A, well, those can be reduced, or in some cases completely removed, by going to the global settings and selecting the lowest oversampling option, or you can increase that with the 4 times oversampling. Those whistling high frequencies kind of add to the background by sounding a little bit like other birds are singing in the environment too, but at some point I could probably intentionally synthesize some better bird songs, so I'll go for the lower quality option today.